Secretary General of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Kimbo Wallace, the Principal Deputy National Cyber Director of the White House in US, Siemtje Möller, the Parliamentary State Secretary of German Federal Minister of Defense, Dr. Markus Richter, State Secretary and German Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community and responsible for all the digital activities, Susanne Baumann, State Secretary im Foreign Ministry, Sinan Seelen, Federal Office of the Protection of the Constitution, Vice President Dr. Catherine Gittau, ICT Secretary at the Office of the President and Cabinet of Kenya, William Middletown, Cyber Ambassador of the United States, of the United Kingdoms, and Alexandre Poty, Deputy Chairman, State Service and Special Communication and Information Protection of Ukraine. And now I could continue to welcome you. Time is running. So please forgive me, you all are very welcome here in the Hasso-Plattner Institute, the German Excellence Center for Digital Engineering. So this is a university institute, very closely related with the University of Potsdam. We are a faculty of this university, and the institute is financed by Hasso-Plattner. There the name comes from, and Hasso-Plattner is the founder of SAP, the biggest German, the biggest European digital company. And so we are happy in a close relation with industry, with politics, with organizations, with the public administration to try to drive also digital topics in the society. So we educate the future leaders in digital technology, and we think we have also the duty to transfer university research results into practical application. So today we are speaking about cybersecurity. So we have a department for cybersecurity. We have a master course in cybersecurity. This is research, but the outcome of this research is so relevant for all the society life, in industry, in politics, and there is some speciality with cybersecurity. It makes no sense to do cybersecurity alone. Cybersecurity, of course, you have to take care of that your computers, your network has all the security measures that are responsible. But at the end, you need to implement cybersecurity commonly. And so we are happy that this conference helps to stress this topic and also to discuss ways how we can do in the international relation to provide cybersecurity, because it's the biggest problem and the biggest challenge. With all the good duties of digitalization, it opens the doors for attackers, it provides new means for fake news. This all comes with this technology. So we need to be prepared, and we need to discuss commonly how to do this. So once a year, since many years, we organize here in the HPI the National Cybersecurity Conference in Germany. So at least the Germans in this conference, we know and they know this place. So we are happy that we also have the chance now today for you coming from many countries around the world to continue this discussion. And I'm happy to invite Annalena Baerbock, the Foreign Ministry of Germany, now to the stage to give their keynote.
Professor Meine, Secretary General Schmidt, liebe Helga, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. One night in late summer, paramedics are treating a 78-year-old woman who is in critical condition. They rush her into an ambulance, but when they call the local hospital, they are told, "We are totally sorry, but we cannot accept the patient." They have to drive to another hospital 32 kilometers away. This delay is a threat for the condition of the patient, and the woman shortly afterwards dies. When I read this in the newspaper, I thought, well, this must be a mistake. This cannot be Germany. We don't reject patients at our emergency ambulances. But when I read the article further, it was explained the reason why the hospital couldn't accept the patient was a ransomware attack on its servers. Hackers encrypted the hospital's data and then demanded payment to release it. The hospital, therefore, was forced to suspend emergency care and postponed many operations. This is not the plot of the next Matrix sequel. This happened at the University Hospital of Düsseldorf in September 2020. And these kinds of cyber attacks at hospitals, electricity carriers, or also companies are carried out every day in many places around the world. Montenegro and Albania have been hit by attacks which paralyzed their economies and public lives just recently. In Costa Rica, an attack crippled the Ministry of Finance and Public Health Networks, forcing President Rodrigo Chavez to declare a national state of emergency. And we all remember the ransomware attack that shut down the Colonial Pipeline, affecting consumers and airlines across the US. All of this shows that the damage caused by cyber attacks is real. Germany's Tech Industries Association Bitkom estimates that they cost the German economy over 200 billion euros during each of the last 2 years. Often criminals are behind these attacks. But states too use cyberspace to spy on industry and politicians, to spread disinformation and meddle in democratic processes. We saw this also here in Germany in the run-up to our federal elections last year, when the group Ghostwriter, which is steered by the Russian state, targeted numerous members of parliament with pitching attacks on their private and official email accounts. Cyber technology has also become part of modern warfare, as we have seen in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. On the day of the invasion, so the 24th of February, Russia attacked the Viasat communication network in Ukraine, causing a communication outage of the whole country. When I was in Kiev earlier this month, I learned how experts at Ukraine's cybersecurity authority now are taking actions against Russia's cyber aggression. They use crowdsourced intelligence to report troop movements. They deploy Starlink terminals to keep Ukrainians connected online, and they have fought off attacks on their energy systems. Germany, as many other countries, is supporting Ukraine in these efforts by providing hardware and by funding projects that help people stay connected online, even in combat zones. Often these connections are the only way they can make contact to their loved ones or to stay safe. What is clear to us today is that wars and conflicts are fought not only with bullets and cruise missiles, but also with bots and malware. Cyberspace will therefore be a key factor in our national security strategy, which we are just writing as the whole government. Because keeping our citizens safe means not only protecting them against war and violence, but also protecting the fundamental freedoms that define our society. In our digitalized world, we need a secure cyberspace for the interactions that we engage in every day, from messaging our children to online shopping and medical treatment or using digital tools. Making cyberspace secure, therefore, goes to the core of our security policy. We are, in this regard, taking up a four-pronged approach to this. First, together with our partners, we will strengthen our ability to detect cyber threats, to protect ourselves from them or to recover from them. If we are hit by a cyber attack, we will ensure that people can still use railways, receive medical treatment, and that police can still operate. To do so, we, however, need stronger and more resilient infrastructure. Second, cyberspace is not an unregulated area. The provisions of international law also apply to cyber activities. But we must do way more to implement these agreed norms. This is the objective of our work within the UN and also within the OSCE. Third, we will effectively fight cybercrime. This means that we will act quickly and decisively against hackers with state-of-the-art cyber units and technology. But it means also holding states that tolerate or support criminal activities accountable. And this is a hard way to go. Fourth, we will strengthen international cooperation, dialogue, and development. Our security also depends on the security of our neighbors and friends. We are therefore joining forces within the EU, and at the last NATO summit, we took the decision to set up virtual repeat response teams that will bring together our most skilled experts after cyber attacks to help fight off hackers. To make progress in all these 4 areas, we have important work to do at our national level. In Germany, we know that our systems need updating urgently. The first question that we have to ask ourselves is therefore, do we have the right set of laws and institutions to deal with cyber attacks? The federal government has set out the legal basis for countering cyber threats, including when they affect multiple federal states. At the moment, there are, however, still too many different procedures and institutions in our different federal states and cities. That needs to change. To act more effectively, we need to assign clear responsibilities for cyber defense, including below the threshold of military attacks. And I personally strongly believe we need to pool our forces in this regard, even if this means amending our constitutional law. The second question is, do we have the right methods and procedures to ensure cybersecurity? To avert cyber attacks at an early stage, risk analysis and early warning are key. Federal governments need to obtain all relevant information quickly, and this needs a strong national cyber response center. Therefore, our Federal Foreign Office can contribute to these efforts with this international network of government officials, as well as providing intelligence and access to cyber experts and civil society representatives from around the globe. And again, here we still have to work to get more experience. And crucially, the German government needs secure communication. This is hard to say in the year 2022, but we still have to work on this. This is particularly important for the Federal Foreign Office with its more than 230 embassies and consulates worldwide, and given the interest that various actors have on this data. Our IT experts are therefore setting up new, highly secure channels which all federal agencies and German missions abroad can use to communicate with each other. Beginning of next year, so in beginning 2023, we will also deploying highly secure channels of communication with other countries. In addition to this, we are working towards opening the first German data embassy, meaning a data center located outside German territory where we will store critical information and protect it from attacks on our own national system. And Professor Meinl, you were mentioning that you have a master student's degree here on cybersecurity. So whoever is finishing within the next months or within the next years, the Foreign Office is a great place to work, as also all the other public institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking so open and frank about this situation because we have to definitely get quicker on this topic. Putin's war of aggression confronts us with a new reality. It has underlined the need for greater international dialogue on security and cyber policy. To defend cyberspace and to ensure that we remain a free, open, stable and secure society, we have to work together internationally to ensure that it protects the basic freedoms of our citizens, to ensure a society where we can communicate safely with our loved ones, where we can hold free and fair elections, where our universities and our businesses can function safely, and where our hospitals can deliver essential services to all the people who urgently need them all around the year. Because cybersecurity is human security, it's our security. That is why I'm so pleased to welcome all of you from different parts of the world, but also from different professions here at Potsdam today. This event is an opportunity for you to share your ideas on how to tackle the greatest challenge of our digital age. Because we need all areas of society to be involved. Governments and civil society, industry and academia. And we have to think outside of the box. When I was in Kiev, which I just mentioned, I visited there the Cyber Disinformation Center, which has 70,000 people being employed. And then I came in a room where there were students sitting, I guess, between actually 16 and 22. And they said, these are our true experts. And I think this is the way where we here, especially in Germany, but also in other European countries, we have to have more courage to really think outside of the box to counter these cyber attacks. And this is the whole idea behind this conference, to exchange ideas, but also to have the courage to think outside of the box about what we could do next. All together, and I really hope that you enjoy this conference and come with great ideas. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very, very much, Foreign Minister Baerbock, for those important messages. We will take your 4 points with us into our discussions throughout the day, and indeed do plan to pick up on all of those very, very important elements that you mentioned. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we wish you utmost success as you continue to supervise completion of Germany's first ever national security strategy with its strong component of cyber security. Ladies and gentlemen, to further set the stage for our first panels, we now have the opportunity to hear high-level messages from international and German stakeholders working both together and on their own to do exactly what the foreign minister just outlined, to build a 21st century security architecture that is truly fit for purpose. And I now have the great pleasure of introducing as our first speaker, Helga Schmidt. She is Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and previously served as Secretary General of the EU's diplomatic service, the EAS. Welcome, madam. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you in Potsdam here today. Thanks for the kind invitation. And it was important for me to be here because I represent the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the world's largest regional security organization, and we are an organization under Chapter 8 of the United Nations. And we have 57 participating states from North America, Central Asia, South Caucasus, the whole of Europe. And I'm saying that because I think Professor Meindl is right. You cannot do cyber and cyber security on your own. You need to work together. Now, representing a security organization, I have to say that security in Europe is more precarious than probably at any point in my lifetime. What we see in Ukraine is an unprecedented and flagrant abuse of the international rules and norms that provided for relative peace and stability in post-war Europe. And the German minister is right. It's a war of aggression. It's waged by one participating state of the OSCE against another. And let me also say it's a war of choice. And I would really, before I come to the issue of the day, I would also really want to underline that, because Russia was offered dialogue before to hear their concerns and to offer reassurance. NATO did that, the US did it, others did it. Also in the OSCE, we offered a renewed European security dialogue in the weeks just before the war. But Russia chose force instead. Now, when it comes to cyber, in the years previous, we all became expectant that any future conflict would be more hybrid in nature, with cyber and used among other tools to disorientate and to disrupt, particularly, of course, critical infrastructure and government systems, without reaching the threshold of armed conflict according to international law. So what I mean is that cyber measures were envisaged to play a large part before or alongside corresponding aggression. And we have seen that play out with the attack on the KA satellite system immediately prior to military action, with sophisticated attacks against financial and government institutions, Trojan, Mars Stealer and Caddy Wiper malware, and numerous phishing and distributed denial of service attacks. Even if the effectiveness of cyber measures employed in Ukraine were not of the magnitude that one may have expected before, they nonetheless confirmed that cyber is now clearly established and an integral part of an adversary's arsenal and an essential part of any effective defense and deterrence. And because of that, at the OSCE, we have for, I think, almost a decade now, treated cyber akin to arms control. On arms control, as you all know, we agreed the Vienna document, Conventional Forces in Europe and Open Skies Treaty in the 90s, with the intention of promoting military transparency, predictability, stability, and avoid escalation, miscalculation, and conflict. We used the same logic for cyber, where equally important, but perhaps less well known, the OSCE has 16 cyber ICT confidence-building measures, again designed to avoid unintended conflict or crisis that might stem from the use of information and communication technologies. The sustained use and development of the OSCE's confidence and building measures was endorsed by this May's European Council conclusions on the EU's cyber posture. These measures are also interesting because whereas the modernization of conventional arms control frameworks is unfortunately slightly frozen, our cyber confidence building measures remain a rare island of cooperation in the OSCE. Let us not forget, in the OSCE we have Russia as a participating state. To be clear, the OSCE itself does not have a mandate to tackle cyber incidents, including malicious ones. So instead, we use our measures to develop concrete tools to strengthen our participating states' cyber resilience and strategic partnerships, so they themselves can actually tackle the increased threats in cyberspace. What it means is that we maintain an extensive point of contact network. This comprises so-called cyber diplomats, policymakers, but also technical experts across our 57 states. It is not only a virtual phone book of contact details, but it's a living community through which participating states share information and, upon request, assist each other. Such partnerships can avoid misinterpretation or escalation of cyber incidents. A similarly good example of how we actually foster collaboration is our 15th cyber confidence building measure on the protection of critical infrastructure. The war against Ukraine has drawn attention to the complex interdependencies across borders and the severe regional consequences, not just local or national, that attacks against infrastructure may have. Thousands of wind turbines here in Germany, for example, were not fully operational or maintainable due to cyber attacks targeting Ukrainian satellite infrastructure. Via our cyber building measure number 15 on infrastructure protection, states are more regularly exchanging mutual practices and experience, and those with more advanced capabilities are giving others support by helping to identify current and future capacity building in our region. And via these sustained contacts, we are progressively seeing states coming to the aid of those who have been victims of such incidents, as well as working together to investigate and to mitigate them, and expose and condemn the perpetrators. As an organization, our staff in the Secretariat work to support the implementation of all of our confidence-building measures. We do that by producing guides and resources and delivering in-person and online training courses, also to help increase the capacities of a broader network of cyber professionals and cyber diplomats across the states. That all advances national preparedness, but also helps with regional resilience. At this time of increased tension and very clearly the absence of trust and confidence, I sincerely hope, of course, that states will invest more in our confidence-building measures. They work on a voluntary basis with an Adopt a CBM initiative. This has run since 2018, and almost half of the OECD states have adopted and are leading work in the individual areas. And of course, it's my ambition to increase the number of states who participate. The more people are involved, the stronger our measures are. And this isn't just about practical or technical capacity and resilience. It's also about diplomatic resilience. Because the more cooperation and dialogue we can foster, the more we can try to slowly restore trust and confidence. Our inclusive platform of 57 states, East and West, means that countries who might consider one another adversaries with malign intent sit beside one another along the same table. This is rare, precious and vital right now when other avenues for East-West dialogue have dried up. Protecting that diplomatic communication and staying open has to be an essential part of international cyber policy. So we can both listen and try to understand the other and maintain a channel during crisis to de-escalate and avoid communication. And this goes beyond cyber. I'm also a firm believer that we can protect the island of cooperation around OSCE cyber diplomacy, even in these toughest times, that it not only benefits our cyber security, but could create goodwill that has downstream benefits in other contentious policy areas in hopefully better times. And of course, I sincerely hope that better times will come, but whatever the prevailing climate, we will remain committed to our core mission here of fostering dialogue and cooperation, including to cyber, to promote stability for almost 2 billion people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Helga Schmidt for those very interesting messages that we will also pick up on when we talk about resilience later on this morning. It is now my pleasure to hand over the floor to Sintje Müller. He is is Parliamentary State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Defense and responsible for cyber and IT. Welcome, you have the floor.
Principal Deputy National Security Director
long before the outbreak of open hostilities. Russian attacks against digital infrastructure with the aim of destroying software and data are demonstrable not only in Ukraine, but also in the US, in Poland, the Baltic States, and in other NATO partners. Yes, state institutions were targeted. Similarly, attacks unfold in the information environment through hybrid warfare. They often go unnoticed by the general public, but are traced and tracked by military professionals. The war in Ukraine has highlighted the following phenomena. First, the cyber information space is used in a targeted manner, in the run-up to and also during a military conflict. Fake news and disinformation target public opinion. Visible cyber attacks, also in civilian facilities and civilian infrastructure, such as restaurants and banks, serve to create uncertainty and destabilization. In addition, state actors, non-state groups, and individual actors also operate in cyberspace. Hacktivism eludes state control. In origin and impact, these activities are not limited to conflict states. This results in a gray area between actors, regions, countries, domains.
Thank you. I was wondering that I couldn't hear myself, so thank you. So, this results in a gray area between actors, regions, countries, domains, and different phases: peace, crisis, and war. It also has been shown that internal and external security in the cyber information space cannot be sharply delineated. An interdisciplinary approach is not only useful, but it may be the only way to combat these issues. The war in Ukraine has shown that a well-functioning cyber defense is essential in order to remain capable of action. With regard to Germany, it should be noted, our national cyber security is based on the spheres of activity by the Ministry of Interior, the Foreign Ministry, and the Defense Ministry. Thus to say, cyber defense, cyber foreign policy, and cyber defense as well, but from the outside. The Defense Ministry as a whole and the German armed forces deliver their capabilities in cyber and information space in accordance with departmental constitution mandate, thus making its contribution to nationwide cyber security. In Germany, however, the defense against threats outside of the military case of tension or defense is essentially the responsibility of the 16 states within Germany, meaning the Bundesländer. Often the level of implementation is located at the municipal level, resulting in an almost unmanageable number of actors with a complex network of responsibilities and mutual dependencies. This alone can be very challenging in the event of emergency. Additionally, the complex cybersecurity architecture with often limited personnel resources encounters highly dynamic actors and patterns of action in this cyber and information space. Responses and protective measures are not available on demand and cannot be pre-planned in a template-like manner. Maximum flexibility here is key, but hard to come by. When it comes to such an emergency, technical protective measures often cannot be erected at short notice. Compared to a wall of sandbags, for example, that protects quickly and efficiently, the protection of systems in cyberspace must be planned at an early stage and taken into account when designing the system. The term cybersecurity by design must therefore not just be a phrase, but must be mandatory when procuring such systems. Thus, defense in cyberspace already begins in peacetime, even independently of the constant threat situation. We must prepare and consider this aspect regarding the core mission of the Bundeswehr. Specifically, we need to intensify infrastructure relevant to defense and keep the capabilities to operate and protect these infrastructures functional even in the state of defense. The state's capability for action and defense requires the protection of its own IT systems and network infrastructures against cyber attacks. We need clear specifications. These specifications will also be required for those urgently needed systems that are not operated by the state, for example, communication systems or the power grid. Since the success of a cyber attack and subsequent system failures cannot be prevented with full certainty, rapid response times are essential in coordinating between security authorities, possibly among several states and federal ministries. Hence, these events need to be trained among these actors in order to prevent chaotic situations when the threat is real. To emphasize this clearly once again, in the event of a serious cyber attack, we will not have time to clarify responsibilities, find contacts, and coordinate procedures. We must be prepared for this as a society and, above all, as a state. The following two core functionalities emerge as frameworks for an advanced cybersecurity architecture. First of all, the foundation of state responsiveness in cyberspace is the development of a common, current, and holistic picture. This must include the ability to analyze, evaluate, and assess dynamic, complex cyber situations. Secondly, the state's response to cyber incidents, and particularly larger-scale campaigns, must be based on a tested and rehearsed decision-making process. And yet, there needs to be a case-by-case flexible coordination. This includes a shared ability to actively coordinate actions among the various actors to repair damage and restore the function of compromised systems. In her keynote speech on the National Security Strategy, the Minister of Defense, Christine Lambrecht, said, "The dividing lines between internal and external security must not be blurred. In a threat environment where state and non-state attackers are targeting the gray areas, core capabilities enable us to maintain these proven dividing lines even when responding to cyber incidents. This way, we will remain capable of action. In understanding the National Security Strategy as an umbrella security policy document that takes an integrated approach across all thematic areas of national security, the state's joint situational and response capabilities in cyberspace should be anchored as elementary pillars in the strategy. The goal of an all-government resilience and the maintenance of the state's ability to act is the essential framework of the national cybersecurity architecture. In order to be prepared in the states of peace, tension, defense, and during a crisis, we must remain responsive and capable of defense in cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sim Kimberla, also for your patience with that slight audio difficulty at the beginning. We've heard several times how important it is to create links between the public and the private sectors, and our next speaker embodies such links in person. Kimbo Wallace is currently the Principal Deputy National Cyber Director at the White House in the United States. She has also served as Assistant General Counsel in Microsoft's Digital Crimes Unit and worked with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, I've been in the tech industry for a little while and I forgot to push the on button. My name is Kimbo Walden. I'm the Principal Deputy National Cyber Director in the White House. This is my first international trip, I started in June, which should demonstrate the importance of U.S.-German relationships for our office and for the administration. It's a pleasure to join you here today at the University of Potsdam to discuss this issue that's near and dear to my heart. Shaping cybersecurity is a major focus in the Office of the National Cyber Director, and I'm happy to share some of my transatlantic perspectives with you. But before I start, I want to thank Professor Meinl for inviting me, and Ambassador Greenberg, I don't see her. Oh, there you are. For inviting us here today. I'm going to share some goings-on in the United States to sort of illustrate our thinking on cybersecurity, and then I'm going to give you a few brief words about our view of the broader international context for the cyber ecosystem. To begin on the U.S. front, the Biden-Harris administration has been busy this year. Cybersecurity has been an essential focus for the administration. And that's manifested in several structural and policy changes. So on the structural side, one of the most important things, in my perspective, that the Biden-Harris administration did was to stand up my office, the Office of the National Cyber Director. Let me talk about that for a few minutes, about who we are and what we do. Our director, Chris Inglis, was nominated by the President in April of 2021, was Senate confirmed in June of 2021, and walked into the White House in July of 2021. We were appropriated then in November of 2021 and hired our first employee in December, and since then we've been sprinting a marathon. He became the first head in the White House responsible exclusively for cybersecurity and the emerging tech domain, cybersecurity as it intersects with emerging technology. To explain our philosophy, I think it would be helpful first to explain what we mean by cyberspace, which is not unlike the other speakers earlier today. And hopefully we'll give some food for thought. Minister Baerbock already gave quite a bit for us to think about as we move through the conference. But let me posit this to you, which is, I think, consistent with her message and others. Cyberspace is composed of three elements, right? The technology part, which is the systems, the routers, the computers, the tablets, the phones. But we have to remember that cyberspace is a human construct. So another element of cyberspace are people. People are not under cyberspace, they're not over it, they're not around it, they're in cyberspace. They're the ones that are developing the systems that we rely upon. Then there's the doctrine, which we heard quite a bit about. The roles and responsibilities. We need to know who's defending what. We need to make sure that we get all three pieces right, because if you think about it, the transgressor is going to go for the easiest entrance. That is vulnerability in our doctrine. If there's no one guarding the gate, they're going to walk right through. If that's unsuccessful, then they'll go to people. There's going to be someone that clicks on a link, invariably. We need to get the people part right. And if we get the doctrine right and the people part right, then the transgressor is forced to go to technology. And finding zero-day vulnerabilities is a much more difficult venture for the transgressor. But we need to get the technology piece right. If we get all three pieces right, then we achieve what we think is our North Star. And for me, the North Star really is to make sure that everyone's able to safely thrive and prosper in the Internet. Full stop. That's what we're here to do. Cybersecurity becomes subordinate to that. We imagine an Internet that reflects our democratic views, that empowers our economies, and that protect privacy. We need to make sure that everyone's able to thrive safely in that environment. And how do we do that? And I'll talk about that in a bit, but we need to make sure that our environment is robust and resilient, and we need to do so in an international context. So that informs, that framing informs all that we do in ONCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director, where we focus on coordinating cyber defense activities across the federal government. Our watchword is coherence. I'll go into that in a bit, in a moment. But essentially, there are many parties within the United States with cybersecurity equities across the government, and we strive to make sure our collective effort is greater than the sum of its parts, such that 1 + 1 = 3. And in furtherance of our strategic goals, ONCD is not an operational agency. For a White House office, we're rather large, but as an operational entity, we're rather small, intentionally. We act by, with, and through others, through our partners. So that's one structural change that the Biden-Harris administration focused on. The other that I'd highlight is the creation of the State Department's Bureau for Cyberspace and Digital Policy. And with our newly confirmed Ambassador-at-Large, Nate Fick, you can expect the United States to redouble its commitments to bilateral and multilateral engagement on cybersecurity. These structural changes are really only part of the administration's story. There's a bit that we've done since the onset of SolarWinds and Log4j on the policy front. So first, we published an executive order that has, that's focused on the cybersecurity of the United States government systems. And it has several areas of focus, including finally implementing key requirements like logging and encryption, multi-factor authentication, ensuring that government contractors take cybersecurity seriously. And we require secure software development practices. The executive order also encapsulates key priorities, such as looking at supply chain security, recognizing that government has a responsibility to lead by example. And we use our purchasing power as a government to drive changes in the ecosystem. On the critical infrastructure part, so that's on the exclusive cyber part, on the critical infrastructure part, the U.S. government agencies have exercised regulatory authority to require enhanced operational cybersecurity from owners and operators of critical infrastructure. And earlier this year, the administration enacted a law that will allow us to implement $1.2 trillion in infrastructure. And we're taking some of the principles of security by design even further by requiring projects receiving funding to have cybersecurity plans in place. So all the funding that goes to our state and local governments will require cybersecurity planning in order to receive that funding. But those are just a few examples of the administration's commitment to cybersecurity. There are countless others, whether at the strategic level, and we're working on our national cybersecurity strategy, or at the very operational level, as exemplified by the indictments, the recent indictments of the Iranian actors for all their wide-ranging criminal activity. But as cybersecurity continues to gain prominence in policy discussions, there are a few key principles that our office has identified to guide our approach, and I'm going to go through those now. There are 4 of them. The first, and arguably the most important, is driving federal coherence across the government landscape. Cybersecurity is unimaginably complex, and we can't necessarily pursue parochial concerns across the government. We have to drive coherence across the many and varied stakeholders, so allowing ourselves to lose sight of our goal, not allowing ourselves to lose sight of our goal, that everyone should share in the full benefits of our digital ecosystem. Second, so the most important one is federal cohesion. The second one is to drive intimate public-private collaboration. This is something a bit more than information sharing. It's not an agreement to operate in silos. You do this and I do that. It's really intimate professional collaboration. We understand that the private sector owns and operates much of our infrastructure. We understand that they develop software and cloud infrastructure. So we have to work closely with the private sector in this space. Like I said earlier, cyberspace, after all, is a human-created domain. Then third, we have to ensure current and future resilience. And what do I mean by this? I mean, we really need to think about shifting the balance of responsibility, shifting the burden of risk from the end user, small and medium businesses, individuals, my daughter, my mother, end user, to those enterprises, and I'm including the federal government, the U.S. federal government as an enterprise in this, but those enterprises that are able to bear the risk of the burden of that risk and can buy it down. So we need to think and shift our paradigm a little bit and make sure that we shift more of the responsibility for cybersecurity to those who are able to bear it. Finally, we have to conduct performance assessments. Our office is responsible for aligning resources to aspirations. We have a budgetary responsibility looking at federal government budgets to make sure that their resources really match our requirements in cybersecurity. As policymakers, we must be clear in our demand for more empirical data about what works well and what doesn't, while recognizing that we can't afford to do nothing while we generate better metrics. So we're doing this as we build the plane. So conducting performance assessment implies a willingness to change. And one of the things I always do when I'm abroad is listen to partners to hear their approaches to cybersecurity challenges. I've been doing that here in Berlin. We have a lot to learn from each other if we're going to get this right. We must also continue to adapt our tools, approaches, and policies to an ever-evolving threat landscape. The frameworks we build must support our democratic goals and preserve accountability while maintaining the flexibility to change when our adversaries do. We can't let our adversaries inform our agenda exclusively. We need to be proactive. I think somebody said we need to work on this at a time of peace. So we must bring coherence to our shared activities to hold bad actors to account. These principles apply in the international context as well. I recently heard a Ukrainian official say our cyber resilience doesn't stop at our borders. His point was that Ukraine's ability to bounce back from cyber attacks directed its way, and to be clear, was speaking about resilience in a narrow context, and some at this conference may, specifically about being able to continue the mission despite being under fire, is in no small part a function of its international partners. So like I said at the beginning, we have to make sure that our current system is robust, that is defensible, that we engage collective action to be able to do that. We also need to make sure that we are resilient and that we identify long-term strategic investments to enable that resiliency. And that has to be done in international contexts. We have to recognize that many of our American companies operate in Europe, and vice versa, and enhance collaboration with them and explore opportunities to harmonize requirements placed on them. As countries with advanced cybersecurity capabilities, we must stand ready to help those under attack by malign actors. And we must assess our collective progress and continue these dialogues to continue to refine and improve our cooperation. I know I was asked to provide an impulse this morning, and I hope I've spurred some thought. But I also want to reiterate the importance of the U.S.-German relationship to my office, the Office of the National Cyber Director, and to the administration in general. I understand that the findings from this conference will help Germany's construction of their national security strategy, of which a significant portion, I understand, will be focused on Germany's cyber framework. We have seen the impacts of the unprovoked and unjustified Russian aggression against Ukraine and the increased importance, therefore, placed on security as a whole, with cybersecurity as a fundamental piece of that. The administration remains committed to work with our partners, whether in the wake of attacks like recent incidents in Albania, in operations including hunt-forward efforts to expel malicious actors, or in the cybersecurity capacity building through multilateral and bilateral initiatives. We are also steadfast in our commitments to security, innovation, and digital freedom. That is democracy affirming, all three together. Thank you for your time again today, and I look forward to the discussions later this morning.
Thank you very much, Kimbo Walden, for sharing your thoughts with us. And in fact, you mentioned your eagerness to exchange with others during this trip abroad, and we will get to hear you again during our second panel this morning, and look forward to that very much. We had now hoped to hear from the State Secretary in Germany's Federal Ministry for the Interior, Dr. Markus Richter, but unfortunately he had to travel at very short notice to Munich this morning to stand in for his minister. So we will now move to our final speaker amongst these high-level impulse statements, and she is Dr. Catherine Gittau. She's a distinguished cyber security consultant who has served as CEO of Kenya's ICT Authority and also as ICT Secretary in the Office of the Kenyan President. She has also represented her country on numerous United Nations governmental committees. Welcome. Wonderful that you could be with us today.
Our host, Professor Mano of the Hasso-Plattner Institute, distinguished fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am both honored and humbled by this invitation from the German Federal Foreign Office to present an intervention at this auspicious gathering, during which the Federal Republic of Germany has signaled to the world the intention to develop and publish a national security strategy. I believe it's the first one, setting out the broad elements of Germany's approach to international cybersecurity, and also to update Germany's cybersecurity strategy. I'm particularly pleased to participate in an event which has taken place a few days after my compatriot, Eliud Kipchoge, set a new world record while winning the Berlin Marathon. And of course, add my public congratulations to him and to the city of Berlin on this achievement. Germany's publication of a national security strategy, as well as the updating of the national cybersecurity strategy, are highly commendable initiatives in the current global climate. In a world of perverse and aggressive postures, it's refreshing to see a global powerhouse who is willing to set out a clear and transparent roadmap, both for your own citizens and for global partners of goodwill. It is wonderful that you have brought together academia, the private sector, government, and international friends together to bring ideas and expertise. In line with the confidence-building measures set out in the framework of responsible state behavior developed within the ambit of the United Nations group of governmental experts, Germany will help other countries to be more secure by clearly setting out her position. I note that Kenya has also recently published a cybersecurity strategy, the second, and trust that there will be coherence between the two documents based on international norms and good practices. Information and communication technology, cyber technology, has transformed Kenya and given us hope. At the end of the last century, this technology was confined to the privileged few who could meet the regulatory and financial requirements necessary to install a simple telephone in their premises and put a computer on their desk. Fast forward 20 years, and many citizens of developed nations are astonished at the pervasive use of information and communication technology, even by the poorest and most disadvantaged in our societies, and the power and range of locally developed applications that are used by ordinary people. It is truly an inspiring success story. However, we remain cognizant that the ubiquity, financial exposure, and critical service support of ICT usage makes a country like Kenya highly vulnerable to attack by malicious actors. Between 2014 and 2021, I had the privilege of representing Kenya in the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on International Security in the context of information and communication technology. Germany was represented in all three groups that were convened during this period, and indeed Germany chaired the 2017 group, and I believe Carsten Gehr, who was my neighbor in the 2014 group, served as the chair. And at this juncture, I will confess that as a delegation of one person, if you can have such a delegation, and coming from the ICT domain, I often consulted the German legal experts from the German delegation when I needed to check my understanding on a point of international law before presenting my country contribution. I would like to officially thank the German Foreign Office for the unstinting and gracious support that I received in response to my request. It always helps to sit next to a powerful country. The events of the past 3 years have demonstrated the complexity of security policy and strategy in a world where natural phenomena, the use of social media by more than half of the global population, as well as emerging technology, are applying new stresses on international peace and security. Information and communication technology both presents a risk and a source of opportunity and solution in this situation. Technology has enabled globalization, and this has created the conditions, for example, where a pandemic can very quickly occur. But at the same time, it was the same technology that enabled the rapid development of vaccines through global collaboration of scientists, as well as making it possible for work and education to proceed despite national lockdowns. I was told that here in Germany, it was often children that were participating in your high-level meetings. In Kenya, we had a lot of goats and cockerels in the background. Since their first meeting in 1998, the UNGG has produced 4 reports, each of them shedding more light, and I think Kimbo Wallace talked about doctrine, on the complex question of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. The open-ended working group of the same name, which enables all countries to participate equally in the development of international policy for cyberspace, was born out of the deliberations of the 2017 UNGG, which I remind you was chaired by Germany. And the meetings and deliberations of this group will proceed until at least 2025. These groups have delivered important outputs. The 11 norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace set out in the 2015 report of the UNGG will, as they are implemented, help to build a positive global culture for the use of ICTs. The confidence-building measures can help to shape the ICT agendas, priorities, and investments of states in a manner that fosters international peace, and the wisdom and guidance provided through the discussions and consensus on the application of international law, as well as emerging technology, capacity building, and the role of regional and international organizations is helpful and welcome. It is not surprising, therefore, that the framework of responsible state behavior based on these outputs has been adopted by several regional organizations. I give as an example the ASEAN region, because I was with them last week. And, they're using this as a blueprint for further work, which will provide the kind of global coherence that we need. Australia and Mexico, alongside other countries, endorsed the implementation of a regular voluntary survey through which countries could measure their own progress in implementing the framework, as well as share information and benchmark with one another. Further impetus is provided by the program of action sponsored by France and Egypt alongside more than 40 countries to establish a permanent UN forum covering this agenda. Is it possible to identify a different agenda for developing countries within these efforts? Firstly, we can appreciate that developing countries view ICTs as an accessible technology that we can cost-effectively apply to address local needs as well as to innovate for the international market. Secondly, we must recognize that the implementation of this technology requires substantial investment in infrastructure, education, and training. Thirdly, due to intellectual property protection regimes, as well as the domination of the core technology of this domain by a few actors, and I'm talking about microchips as well as technologies such as 5G and 6G, it should be recognized that large elements of this technology remain a black box to many countries. Fourthly, the high-level expertise needed to protect public and private networks, equipment, systems, and data mean that most developing countries not only struggle to acquire and maintain the necessary level of expertise to maintain this environment, but they are also vulnerable to misuse by third parties. Finally, I note that many developing countries are rich in tech-savvy youth, many of whom are underemployed or unemployed. And I think this also poses a risk in the global environment. The chief concerns, among the chief concerns of developing countries must therefore be to maintain peace and security in cyberspace, to minimize barriers to technology access, to protect critical infrastructure, and hopefully in future to enforce reparations on those who willfully damage or destroy this infrastructure. I tried to insert this into the 2021 report unsuccessfully, so I'm taking advantage of this invitation to reiterate the point and hopefully get more support from Germany and other partners in future. To protect vulnerable persons in cyberspace, to adopt protocols, and to cooperate with other countries in the prevention of the misuse of developing country infrastructure and systems by third parties, to protect the integrity of the supply chain, and to collaborate in building technical and operational capacity. We must also foster the right values in our youth. Otherwise, cyberspace will become even more of a criminal space in future. Most of these concerns are well covered by emerging global policy, but we must continue to work together to prioritize initiatives that will address the pressing concerns of developing as well as developed nations. Developed and developing countries should work together to apply a more holistic approach to security. By solving problems together in a spirit of mutual respect, we are more likely to find sustainable solutions for existing and emerging threats to world security. Terrorism, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the extreme weather that has been attributed to the effects of climate change have demonstrated that issues that start in one part of the world may quickly affect or even devastate other parts of the world. No one is insulated from the common vulnerability of our humanity. We should therefore like to see joint cybersecurity exercises, investments that foster youth employment, and trade policies, capacity building, and joint ventures that enable useful technology that has been innovated in developing countries to penetrate global markets. The Ushahidi platform that was developed in Kenya was very useful when there was an earthquake in Haiti, but it's still viewed as a social enterprise, and it has not really entered the global market as an income-generating opportunity for Kenya. All these will prosper developing countries and hopefully reduce insecurity created by poverty and hopelessness. Security by design, and I think now we need to go beyond security by design and talk about integrity by design. Technology will reduce the supply chain insecurity and mitigate the ethical issues that arise from the use of intelligent technology. Policies that foster such initiatives and the desire of countries and regions to work together will help us all to be more secure. I will finish by saying that our mutual insecurity is not rooted in cyber threats or climate change or pandemics or territorial threats. Instead, it emanates primarily from the selfish attitudes and actions of human beings. When we learn to share ideas, technology, opportunities for work and resources, the perceived risks of, for example, migration will diminish. Nobody leaves their home voluntarily. And after all, ICT is a technology that facilitates sharing. The solution for the emerging mega challenges in our world will come from intelligent people in both the developed and developing worlds. You are experienced in developing extraordinary technology based on your achievements at the cutting edge of industrial and technological development. We in developing countries are accustomed to solving insurmountable problems with few resources. Our mutual sustainable prosperity is our mutual sustainable security. A fairer world will always be a safer world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine Gittau, for that very strong appeal for international cooperation that takes into account both interdependencies and also widely varying capacities of different actors. All of our speakers have delivered some very important inputs for the first panel that we will now begin. It is entitled Russia's Cyber War Against Ukraine, Lessons for Effective Cyber Defense and International Cooperation. Already in April, just 2 months after Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, Microsoft documented a sharp spike in what it called relentless and destructive Russian cyber attacks, not only on the digital systems of Ukrainian institutions, but also on citizens' access to information and services critical for their health and their livelihoods. The report also noted espionage activity against other NATO member states and predicted a continuing escalation of cyber attacks that has indeed come to pass as the war grinds on. We've gathered an outstanding panel of experts to talk now about the current risks and about the lessons learned, and to share their perspectives on how we can factor that assessment into working together and defending our democracies with a truly collaborative effort. I'd now like to ask our panel members to please join me on stage, and then I'll introduce all of you. Yes, very good. Mr. Leaflander. Is this working? Yes, very good. It is my great pleasure to introduce our panel, beginning here next to me with Alexandre Poty. He is Deputy Chairman of Ukraine's State Service of Special Communication and Information Protection, and he previously served as Deputy Chief Systems and Tools Designer at the Private Sector Institute of Information Technology. A very warm welcome. Thank you so much for making the trip to be with us here in Berlin. And seated next to him is Fanto Orr. She is a senior intelligence analyst in Microsoft's customer security and trust organization. And she, in fact, was the lead author of that report that I just mentioned a moment ago, in collaboration with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center and the AI for Good Research Lab. And she previously worked in the U.S. government. Fanto Orr, thank you so much for coming the long way to be with us. Seated next to her is Sinan Seylan. He is on the outside of the panel. There he is. Sinan Seylan is Vice President of the German Domestic Intelligence Service, the BFV, and in charge of counterintelligence and cyber defense. And he's had a long career in government service, as well as worked in the private sector for the tourism group TUI. Welcome to you. Wonderful to have you with us. And seated next to him in the middle of the panel is Christian Mark Leaflander. He's the head of the Cyber and Hybrid Policy section at NATO. Formerly, he served at the Estonian Defense Ministry and in the diplomatic service as Estonia's defense counselor to NATO. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. And before we begin, just a brief word to the audience. We are very eager to hear from you as well. We will bring your questions in the latter part of the panel. We do have microphones in the room for that purpose. And in order to be sure that we fit in audience questions, I'm going to remind all of our panelists to please, if you would, keep your answers fairly brief so that we can do a couple of rounds of discussion before we open up to the audience. And I'd like to start out with threat assessment. We have heard quite a bit about the vulnerabilities and risks that have been exposed, among other places, in Russia's cyber war against Ukraine. But I'd like to ask all of you to share what you are seeing in your own work. And Alexandre Poty, if I may begin with you, your colleague Yuri Shichol said a few days ago that Ukraine has become nothing less than a testing ground for modern cyber weapons. So would you share, please, what kind of attacks you're seeing and what the greatest risks are, both for the Ukrainian state but also for citizens?
Thank you very much. for this question. I'm very glad to see such much people interested in cyber war and cyber attack in Ukraine. I prepare a small presentation for become a discussion lesson of cyber war, cyber attack against Ukraine. Please upload my presentation and I start discuss problem of cybersecurity in Ukraine today. One moment. So I think that when we discuss, for example, a lesson of cyber attacks and some statistics, very interesting see of technical data, and I can see, I see this technical data about cyber attack in Ukraine. Sorry for this pause.
I see the technicians are hard at work,
yes,
but
yes. Maybe cyber attack, maybe cyber incident. So I start and after this maybe return and presentation. The first lesson of cyber attack in Ukraine and very important issues that important lesson is we need and we must know you, our enemy. Today we know your enemy for Ukraine, and cyber attacks in UK save us a support kinetical attack and special operation in Ukraine. Cyber attack and kinetical attack very harmonized and work together and support another and another. Criminal groups are highly coordinated by special service and obtain significant destruction potential. This, I prepare a special timeline of different cyber attack and different kinetical and political attack. We can use timeline from Microsoft and use our data and prepare this timeline. And on this timeline, we can see that in these first weeks of war, first weeks of war, we can see clear coordination between political and conventional attack and cyber attack. Who is behind these attacks? Today we know mostly military hackers coordinate GRU, FSB, and Federal Intelligence Service of Russian Federation. Cyber criminals perform tasks set by special service. A so-called volunteers, for example, that clear imitation of Ukrainian army, they pretend they work and a civic society, but in the reality it's small cover of the military operation. Sorry, not slide. The second lesson. During stealing of money and ransom are not two real and key goals of cyber attacks. They intend to collect information about public, government, citizen, private infrastructure and so on. They work to destroy the information infrastructure, to spread panic and distrust in the authorities among the citizens. This is main goal of different cyber attack in Ukraine today. They also intend to cause a humanitarian disaster affecting civilians. And of course...
Your slide is there now.
Oh, back, please. Next. This is timeline I speak about. You can see on up political and military events, and down and cyber attack events of the day. You can see harmonize these events between physical sphere or political sphere and cybersecurity, cyberspace sphere. The next slide. This is main goal which we have on cyber attack today in Ukraine. Not only ransom and money and so on, because a lot of goals of political and social decision from aggressor and spread panic and house civilian and citizen. Next slide. Very interesting. Next slide. Third lesson. Russian Federation deliberated attack civic infrastructure and civilian targets. This is map of cyber attack of different regions in Ukraine. For example, for example, if you can see region Lviv and Odessa region, we have interesting fact. You can see that Lviv and Odessa region have a high level cyber attack, but low level of kinetic attack. Lviv region is transit region for refugees and final destination IDPs. And Odessa region is a region where sea port, where Ukraine grain are blocked. Next slide, please. Fourth lessons. We have to be alert for the next attacks. The peak of the cyber attack was obvious, an invasion. We understand that the preparation of this peak took months of not years. We still feel pressure these days, a very strong one, but we expect that the next big attacks using the same tools, for example, that we used in January and February, may be under development of this moment. The next slide. Who they expect them? We advise to match to social-political events. We recorded clear peaks of certain types of attack during the so-called Victory Day in Russian Federation celebrating, and, for example, during an Independence Day in Ukraine. In this day, we have a peak cyber attacks. Both days were also days of the high odds of Ukraine military and law enforcement. We expected massive shelling and sabotage on the ground. So our message, next slide please, today is we share the same enemy, and this enemy is well prepared for next strikes. They are ready to perform cyber attack on democratic countries, and their weapons and protocols are set and tested. Current decrease in the attacks can be explained by the preparation period for the upcoming ones. Next slide, please. And EU and NATO countries should concentrate efforts on prevention and resilient building. We do know the enemy by name. Ukraine identified specific groups that work against our country, EU and NATO, and have one style. Next slide, please. In this slide, we can see different hackers groups which coordinate in a special service of Russian Federation. And this group work not only Ukraine. This group work EU country and NATO, and we can build a common system to against this group and research their methodic and tactics attack and so on. Next slide, please. And our recommendation about our common efforts between our country, Ukraine and EU country. And today we already work together with our partners and discuss different problems on cybersphere and cyber attack and cyber incident, and work together to increase our cyber resilience, a new term and new system, cyber resilience in cyberspace, different country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to come back a little bit later on to the last point that you made there in regard to collaboration, but let us stay with the question of threat assessment. And Fanta, I think it will go on automatically once you, I'd like to stay with the question of international security because, in fact, Microsoft's report that I mentioned back in April and subsequent reports since then have pointed out that this sharp spike in attacks is not directed only at Ukraine, but, of course, has international ramifications. So can you tell us a little bit about the biggest threats that you are seeing at Microsoft when it comes to international security?
Is it working? Yes. Oh, awesome. Okay. Can you hear me?
Can we get that microphone on, please?
Can Can you hear me now? No? Oh, maybe it's that was my problem here. Microphones. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, I mean, I think what I can say is that from the Russian state actors that Microsoft has been tracking and tracks that are active in Ukraine, they've been active against non-Ukrainian targets for years as well. That there's nothing categorically new there. I think in the context of what's happening in Ukraine, there is a risk that whatever calculus limited those operators' decisions to focus on espionage up to now, we don't know when that could switch to something where that can be escalated to something more in response to efforts to limit international support to Ukraine. As a private sector firm, we wouldn't have insights that a change was coming, right? So I think what we're most concerned about now is continued monitoring and watching for subtle shifts. You know, are we going to see like a pivot to something more destructive that we hadn't seen outside Ukraine to now? We know that Russian state actors are actively seeking access to NATO governments, actively seeking access to NGOs and think tanks that are involved in Ukraine and the assistance efforts there. When that transitions to something beyond theft of data and intelligence is a big risk, I think, now. And it really requires everybody to be on top of basic cyber hygiene, basic security, and also in information sharing so that we know collectively, if we compare notes about what we're seeing, that we'll be able to perceive that shift to a degree that one organization might not be able to.
Could you perhaps also say a word about malicious disinformation, because it was also mentioned, of course, in your report, yep. And we just heard from Mr. Poti that sowing fear, sowing mistrust, anxiety is very much part of the hybrid toolbox.
100%, and 100% an area that we've seen Russian state actors and affiliated actors actively engage in Western context. So you in Europe, I mean, well know that the ecosystem for Russian disinformation is vast, both overt and covert channels, both regular media channels, Telegram channels, social media, and impactful. You know, we in the U.S. know the impact of those campaigns. So that is ongoing. Microsoft recently acquired a firm called Marlboro that is focused on investigating and publicizing those disinformation campaigns, the actors and their networks. And so this is an area where we are really focused on getting more insights in and publicizing what we learn so that folks can be prepared for what's coming down the pike.
Thank you very much. And I'll go now to Mr. Leaflander, if I may. And the day after Russia launched the war, Secretary General Stoltenberg said that NATO was cognizant that the risks of cyber attacks would certainly rise. So if you would please share with us perhaps your assessment of the vulnerabilities and risks that we are in fact seeing since the 24th of February as they concern NATO.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And let me also say, great to be back in Potsdam and great to be here in person. As many of you sort of have heard me sort of say before, this virtual thing over the last few years, it was kind of like eating canned food. It filled your stomach, but it wasn't the real thing. So it's good to be back in person. But let me start with sort of, indeed, sort of the risk part. And I think sort of being cognizant of the sort of the motto, the topic of this conference is shaping cybersecurity. I think the key word here is shaping, because when we look at what's happening, to be very blunt, I think sort of patching and resilience are a big part of an answer, but there's this proactive piece about it, about shaping the technology, shaping the behavior, also shaping behavior of the malicious cyber actors. So there are 3 risks that I would sort of outline and put forward, and looking forward to sort of continuing that during the Q&A session. But I think sort of one of the risks that I see, and in particular when I sort of think about the sort of national security strategy being drafted here, is the sort of myth that the cyber war did not happen, or the cyber war that wasn't. I quite often sort of pick that up out there. And I think that's a bit sort of not only disappointing, but it's also wrong in my opinion. So quite often cyber is sort of kind of examined from the perspective of a nuclear sort of domain or from the conventional domain. I think people sort of kind of confuse cyber for what it is. Sometimes also looking at the sort of the reactive posture, the reaction to the incident. That's not what this is about. I think it is always on. It's continuously contested. It's not war, it's not peace. Some have said that it's sort of an unpeace, a continuous sort of contestation of that cyberspace. And I think you need to realize that, which also tells you that when building your posture and when looking at the appropriate tools to shape that cyberspace, you have to do it continuously. Missing that and being just in a reactive footing, I think, is not going to get you there. Which brings me to my second point. I think there's this fallacy also in terms of thinking that this is a technical problem. It isn't. It is very much a strategic problem. When I look at all of these campaigns, and let's go back to what we just heard from our Ukrainian colleague, many of these activities actually started way before the 24th of February. They've been going on for years, trying to get access to the networks, to pivot, to do the lateral movement, etc., etc., etc. But the effects can be very strategic in nature, and I go back to what the minister told us earlier this morning. So there's a sort of a strong grounding when it comes to cyber in the field of technology, indeed, and you have to understand technology to make the right decisions. But cyber, and if you want to make good decisions, I think it also exists at the operational level and at the political level, at the strategic level. So you have to get it right, particularly as you look at sort of shaping sort of that space in the future as well. And you can do so in many different ways. You can call out bad behavior, as we have done several times with our statements. And this very much in support of developing norms for responsible state behavior. You can also enhance resilience, indeed, sort of make it much more difficult for the adversaries to get in. That's denying the benefits part. But I believe sort of there's this big part when it comes to the imposition of costs as well. Once again, shaping, actively taking part of that sort of competition. And that sort of brings me back to where I started. I don't know what to call it, but I think the closest that we have gotten, and that's what Secretary General has also used, is the notion of strategic competition. That does not necessarily rise to the level of armed attack. It stays below that, and I would even say quite often folks are clever in designing their activities around deterrence and staying below that threshold. But I think sort of missing the political, the strategic piece would be sort of to the detriment of anybody that is trying to make progress. And last but not least, I think you can't go it alone. I think that's the part where we need to sort of do a bit of a rethink, and particularly the industry piece, I think, is going to be very, very important. In other words, it's not kind of like the Lord of the Rings story where like one ring rules them all. I think we all have different pieces of the puzzle, and the question is how to create such sort of interfaces whereby we can create that situational awareness, we can create information and intelligence sharing in order to make smarter political decisions.
I do want to come back in a moment to collaboration and response, but perhaps just one follow-up question on the nature of the risks that you are currently seeing, and particularly in your own country, in the Baltic republics, also on NATO's eastern flank. Clearly, there are a lot of concerns and a lot of vulnerabilities. What worries you most when you look at those regions and the cyber attacks emanating from Russia?
I'm not that concerned about the geography. Cyber knows no borders, as we know. I think what I'm much more worried about is the sort of the failure to really sort of pay attention ahead of the curve. So it's the left of the bank, all of that story, and sort of being much more in a reactive footing when incidents occur. I can tell you, and I think somebody said it earlier this morning, sort of it's not necessarily the 0 days, it's the basics. Sometimes it's sort of folks clicking on links, bad links. Sometimes it's indeed sort of using USB sticks or what have you. In other words, it's the simple things that actually get you in trouble. So if there's one thing, it's the sort of the unknown that could emanate from the very basic cyber hygiene not being done. And then suddenly what you have is a political issue on your hands, whereby we are forced to sort of make a political either statement or to react to essentially something that could have been prevented if we had done a better homework.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go now to Vice President Sinan Seelen, and both your office and also the Foreign Ministry warned again immediately after the Russian attack was launched that we would see a rise in cyber attacks, and that has come to pass. So could you just say a few words about the risks and vulnerabilities here in Germany that concern you most?
Yes, I will do so, and that we share our microphone shows the close cooperation with NATO. What we see in Germany is that the situation, as you mentioned, is definitely not limited on the conflict with Ukraine and the attack of Ukraine. We are also part of the story in Europe and especially in Germany. So if you look to Germany, we see different port scans in order to exploit weaknesses in our systems. So this is nothing new, but the intensity is quite remarkable in these days. And we also see quite flexible actors dedicating the full scale of capacities of internal services, but also other systems to the activities in order to attack us. They are targeting politics, economy, science, research agencies, media, tech, and military. Especially the field of military industry is quite interesting for Russia in these days. And it's not limited on disinformation. It's the whole picture what we see, starting with espionage, sabotage, ransomware attacks, and as you mentioned, it's nothing new. We see these attacks of high intensity for a quite long time, starting years ago, and on a very high level for many years. A new aspect in these days is the strong cooperation between state actors on the one side and cybercrime and hacktivists on the other side. So on the Russian side, we see a holistic approach, including every opportunity to attack Ukraine and Europe and to deal with the new situation. And in a long-term approach, it's absolutely right, and I totally agree that this is not a totally new situation. It's a long run for both sides. It's not only a long run for Russia, but also for Europe. If you look back for hacking activities, I can go back to 2015. We had attack on German Parliament by APT-28. It's GRU, the Russian military service, followed by attacks to politicians and parties, phishing attacks of ghostwriter, as Annalena Baerbock mentioned, phishing attacks to the foreign ministry by APT-28. We had sabotage activities of Sandworm starting 2015, not ending, but we also see Sandworm activities in Ukraine, and they are also active with port scanning in Germany. So this is quite alerting situation which we see. We also see espionage attacks to German government agencies. Ghostwriter was mentioned, and I think it's important to underline that all these are parts of the picture. We only see the attacks, but to bring these puzzle pieces to the whole picture is essential to understand what is mentioned and what is the idea behind the attack. So this is also something which means that we need this close cooperation to come to this big picture, to understand what's next. Last point, which is quite alarming in my point of view, are spillover effects. We didn't talk about this aspect, but if you look to the Viasat attack last year and the effects in whole Europe to router systems, this is something which is also, maybe it's also mentioned, but nevertheless, it's essential to understand that we have to calculate and think also that spillover effects will happen, and we are not able to plan all the scenario concerning spillover effects. This is a new point or a new aspect which we also should keep in mind.
Thank you very much. And I think that last point picks up on what we heard from Helga Schmidt from the OSCE, who talked about the interdependence of infrastructures and the vulnerability that ensues from that. Let me ask all of you now to talk about what you're doing to mitigate the risks that you have just outlined. And, you know, we've heard a lot of impulses from our different speakers just now, whether it's that three-pronged approach that Kimbo Wallace talked about with technology, people, and normative systems, or whether it's the idea of being prepared to detect, to attribute, and then to test response systems well before they have to be used. Whatever it is, please tell us what you're doing and where you face challenges in mitigating. So once again, I'll start with you, if I may, Alexander Poti, and ask how, in the midst of an ongoing conflict with all you're facing, you try to mitigate these risks.
Thank you. Today we have a different model for cybersecurity and information security, we know, but we have one problem. How we can use this model in complex, on different level? In Ukraine, we called this model organizational technical model of cybersecurity. How is model work? The first, we have three basic elements when we build our complex cybersecurity system. The first element, organization element. This element includes different stakeholders in Ukraine which make decision of cybersecurity in critical infrastructure and government resource and so on. On this level or this element, very important task, work together, coordinate different resources and different technology for and makes a policy on international national level for coordinate different stakeholders on different elements. The government institution, private sector, critical infrastructure, academia, and civil society. This is first level. First element or first level. So this level of policy level. The next level for cybersecurity, this is we called technological level. What is this level? This level we realize modern model of cybersecurity framework from USA, identify, protect, detect, response, and recovery. On this level, we build network of response team and network security operations center for national level, sectoral or regional level, of object level. For example, plant of organization and so on. Basic principle of building of level and construct equal network different security response team and security operations center, which very quickly and very effective detect and response and recovery after the cyber incident and cyber attacks. You mentioned very important element, people and technology, and next very important element and process, people, technology, and process. If you have effective process for detect and response and recovery, we don't get a very high impact for infrastructure, for example, after cyber incident and cyber attack. In this level, very important task, coordination between different cybersecurity response teams, national, international, bilateral, and so on. Today, Ukraine very hard work to construct this cooperation between different incident response teams during, within, for example, first organization, and for example, bilateral connection between US Cybercom, Command Cybercom Poland, and response team from Romania, Poland, Australia, and so on. And next element, and next level maybe, but not hierarchically, next element we called basic level on basic element. Who is element? This element consists two important constructions. The first important, and secure information technology system. On this, in this base, we build different security information system for SCADA system, information, industrial control system, government information system, and so on. And we built of model risk management framework from USA, from NIST, for example, and construct a cycle, categorize security, security control, select and implementation security control, assessment, authorization or certification, and monitoring. And this is loop work with risk analysis methodology and technology. And second, next element, very important, citizen, people, awareness people, citizen, employee, military staff, government staff, so on. On this element, very important component, cyber hygiene, cyber culture, awareness, different media company of about cyber attack, cyber risk, and so on, and so on. If you build this construction, complex, different, more effective, different effective model, and this, when this model start work together, we can build resilience cybersecurity system and resilience cybersecurity system. And one moment, and another very important task today for political and strategic level, two tasks. The first, building special norms of behavior country in cyberspace, and very important task and very difficult task. And second, building special strategy of cyber deterrence. We not only prevent cyber attack and reaction of cyber attack, cyber recovery our infrastructure, but we can build system when aggressor don't do cyber attack, because aggressor have a much will be have a lot of price for cyber, for this cyber, this is central cyber attacks. Very task and very important and very hard today task. And I know in USA, for example, Commission Solarium propose a new, the first, second version of cyber deterrence strategy, and our community today can work on this strategy. Thank you very much.
Just a really quick follow-up, if I may, but super short, if you would. I'm curious to know whether you have seen a change in public awareness since the war began, whether you're seeing different behaviors on the part of citizens, because Mr. Leaflander also talked about, you know, that gray area, that unknown, that people, you know, just are not perhaps aware enough of what the risks are that are out there. Is it changing?
Work with our people, of our citizens, very hard work, because different people have different behavior in cyberspace, and these people form a special cyber culture. We know different organization in different country always has cyber culture. But in one organization, we have a good cyber culture, for example, and another organization, we have bad cyber culture. But we only have cyber culture. And today, work with people, citizens, staff, very important element for cybersecurity system whole, because I mentioned people, technology, and process. 3 basic components. And maybe the fourth component, normative and regulation base, because this base identified special policy and rules between people, process, and technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Fanta Orr now. And Fanta, we have heard a lot of calls here for public-private cooperation. And in fact, Microsoft, in the updated report that you published in June, and I know you weren't lead author on that one, but nonetheless, the company did call for what it called a new form of collective defense. I'm quoting here, a coalition of countries, companies, and NGOs. What would that look like? How would that help to mitigate the risks that you've talked about?
Good question. I did read that second report, so I'm just going to try to do my best. No, I think, we have consistently promoted this multi-stakeholder approach to cybersecurity, and, under the auspices of the UN and other international fora, I think, the raw stuff of that cooperation is there. I think what it would be is a consistent and more equal solicitation and exchange of perspectives from all those stakeholders. A lot of times we get together in these fora, and private sector is offering one thing, and NGOs are offering another thing, and our government partners are listening intently, and then we go and have another one. So I think it would be something where we are actually consistently exchanging views and collectively actioning them and coming up with plans for defense forward. I mean, all the stuff is there. We just have to actually do it. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And beyond that, what for you, if you take this panoply of risks that we've talked about, what for you would be the key priority in mitigation?
It depends. Can I say that? No. Gosh, I mean, because there's so many levels to this. I mean, I think this has come up a lot here, is that no one can do it alone. And I hate to beat that drum, but I think that's a fundamental thing. We all have insights into what will work for our respective constituencies and our respective organizations, countries, macro to micro level, that we bring those ideas and those perspectives to the table to collectively come up with a response and a plan is kind of critical. So I think just acknowledging and moving from the point that we can't do it alone and legitimately coming to the table to action these things collectively is number one priority, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Leaflander, in that speech that I mentioned earlier by the Secretary General on the day after the Russia launched the war, he warned that Article 5 could in fact be triggered by a cyber attack. He did, however, refuse to say exactly when that threshold might be reached. And he said that NATO is strengthening its cyber defenses. So clearly all of that does go in the direction that Mr. Poti was just talking about, disincentives and deterrence. Beyond that, can you tell us what NATO has been doing, perhaps before, certainly after February 24th, to try to mitigate the risks, and where you think it's needed that member states step up their actions?
Indeed, I mean, NATO's posture hasn't changed when it comes to Article 5. We maintain constructive ambiguity, and we know it when we see it, I guess. And it would also not be practical to sort of put down any sort of red lines in this regard. But when it comes to sort of what have we done, let me go back to once again to that key word shaping, and I hope that word actually makes it to the German strategy as well. So there's two parts to it when I look at it. One is denying the benefits. And here NATO has played a role in sort of helping to increase national cyber resilience. We have an instrument called Cyber Defense Pledge. It's based on self-assessment. Sort of our allies go through it in order to improve exactly that. I mean, not only the technology part, but the organizational structures, how you're built, how do you sort of see what's happening, and how do you react. There's going to be I think a major point later this fall in Rome, an annual Cyber Defense Pledge conference, where we will take a look at the instrument and whether we need to up our game in terms of how do we create also incentives and use NATO as a platform in order to improve national cyber resilience. So there's also the defense of our networks, of course. When the time comes, we need to be able to act. We have three important functions. That's command control for our military colleagues and consultation function for the Council. We need to be able to perform these functions also under stress. So protecting the institution, I think, is important and is going to be, I think, even more important as we move ahead. But then there's also the part where I think we also have to think about how to shape our adversaries' behavior. And here I already alluded to it, the next statements. Yes, it was about the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, but that was also in response to Iran hacking Albanian government. And indeed, going back to what the minister also said, there are rules in this space, and NATO certainly sort of is keen to make sure that these rules are also sort of followed by different actors. But what keeps me up at night, and what's the difficulty? I think I'd go back to your point actually. In many ways, and once again, when you think about it, if cyberspace is always on, then we need to start early. We need to get to know each other. We need to sort of understand what are these modalities, so that when the time comes and sort of action is needed, we have sorted out all of the practicalities and we know how to sort of take action. Because once again, I suspect a lot of it will not actually get to the level of Article 5. It will stay below that. And how to make use of all of these different actors in such a way as to create win-win solutions, I think that's the million-dollar question that we're trying to solve. Because, yes, getting the civilian military cooperation right is important in order to enable our commanders to operate also in cyberspace. But then, of course, we're clearly understand that technology comes from the private sector. I mean, they happen to be the first responders, and indeed their role in Ukraine was crucial. So how to create these relationships, indeed, would like to echo your words in this regard, I think is something that we will be looking at with a view towards delivering our concept or our ideas at the Vilnius Summit next summer.
Thank you very much. And to Sinan Selen, you mentioned it yourself. In 2015, and again, I believe it was 2021, well before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, cyber attacks on the Bundestag were traced to Russian hackers. Is the government better prepared now than it was then? We heard Annalena Baerbock give us a very frank account of where she sees gaps in preparedness and challenges in terms of what you might call the coherence of the national approach. So can you talk a little bit about what needs to happen to harden the defenses to mitigate the risks that you outlined?
Maybe I start with the point what we need. On the other side, if I look to Russia or China or Iran, I see a strong holistic approach and interagency cooperation, which is very effective. Our answer should be the same. So what we need is a holistic approach, including all interagency approach. We have quite good experiences in counterterrorism. If you look to our joint counterterrorism center in Germany, we bring 40 agencies together day by day, and this is a good story. This is a success story which we have in counterterrorism. I tell this as I was in counterterrorism for a long while, but I think we can take these experiences from counterterrorism to cyber and build up comparable systems. And we have comparable systems. As you look to our cyber defense center in Germany, where we bring our agencies together, this is a good story and a developing issue. On Europe, we have a network between our services, but I think there is room for improvement, to be very frank with you. I think we can be faster in our attribution and faster in the distribution of IOCs. This is a point which is essential to protect our systems. With NATO, there is a quite good cooperation, but I think, again, that we are not pragmatic enough. So we need agile structures. We are too strongly focused on the question who is responsible by law and not who can help in the situation. It's not pragmatic enough in my point of view, and this is something where we need turnaround in our mindset, especially in agencies. Last point, another aspect is the strong cooperation with industry. We have instruments for that on the one side, but to understand the different languages or perspectives and the needs, this is something which is very important, and therefore we need not only, it's essential to have conferences like that, but to act together, to cooperate in the situation. This is essential to deal with the situation in a very efficient way. So I think, to make a very long story short, there is room for improvement. We can be more agile, more pragmatic on the one side. On the other side, and that's the good part of the story, we have the instruments. We have to use these instruments, not only to talk about the instruments, but use them in the situation. This is the point where we can be better.
If you had a wish, one thing that, you could wave a wand and it would change, what would that be?
One wish. I think we need 2 hours for this answer. No. I think if we can share the methods and instruments and talk with the same mindset, not only with industry, but also with our international partners, and follow a common approach, that would be my wish. We have too much differences in the mindset and the perspectives, and one aspect is to bring this together and to understand that we talk about a long-run approach, not only a situation, but a situation which we have to deal with for a very long time. So this is the wish.
Thank you very much. That wasn't 2 hours.
Instead of 2 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open the floor now for questions from the audience. If you have a question, we have microphones, do we not? Where would we... okay, they are here. This is going to require people to... hang on.
Okay, does it work? Yeah, thank you. My name is Wolfgang Kleinwächter. I'm a retired professor for Internet policy and regulation. So we have heard that all the disinformation campaigns, attacking, phishing, DDoS attacks are not really new, but they are now in a context of a kinetic war, and we have to analyze the interrelationship. Are there some new lessons learned from the use of AI, from artificial intelligence, autonomous weapon system, partial autonomous weapon system, drones? Thank you.
Let me ask the panel to think about that for a moment while we get a second question, because we do have a number of questions. I want to try to bundle them. So next to you, go ahead, please. And if you keep your questions fairly short, everybody, that would be great.
Thanks a lot. I'm Tanvir Kabir from Embassy of Bangladesh, Consular Political here. I've been in Berlin. So I have a question. If we understand the origins of cyber attacks, for example, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, where I come from, we can see that, social media have got an important role. In the latest influx of Rohingyas in Bangladesh, the social media started it, and then also cyber attackers from both sides, from Bangladesh and the other side, they got involved. So don't we think that the social media should be also regularized by the countries, like should be an authority, so that cyber attackers do not get food for involvement of possible wars? Thanks a lot.
Okay, let me try to get a couple of answers. We're not going to ask everybody to answer every question. So who would like to speak to either of those? AI?
I can kick us off and leave breadcrumbs behind, I guess. I'm a bit sort of skeptical person when it comes to AI. I think we're quite far away from singularity, whatever that means. But mind you, I think folks are using AI already. Sort of if you have anyway decent network defense, sort of machines are probably helping you to sift through different kinds of incidents on a daily basis, so that your investigators can then focus on a small set of, the ones that perhaps sort of need human sort of attention. But I think, and I hope that our Ukrainian colleague sort of speaks to that, because sort of the use of technology in a conflict and the way I think sort of on the battlefield people have used different technologies, for example, calling in airstrikes or calling in sort of indirect fire, I think that is interesting. If I may use that word, it's a bit of a different business model from what we're used to, right? So that's putting that sort of technology into use in a different way than it was perhaps designed for. As for the AI, I keep on asking this question from folks that investigate AI, and I get like really different kinds of answers. So I don't know when that arrives. I suspect that it will sort of grow gradually over time. Right now, I think, once again, I'd like to sort of go back to what I said. It's not necessarily the sophisticated 0 days that do it. I think it's quite easy to get in. So, but as for the sort of the second question, I think the sort of the trick here is state behavior, right? And to me, when I look at sort of what's happening, it's not NATO as an international organization that creates law. It's nations and state behavior that sort of tells you what is okay and what is not okay in that space. So in many ways, I think what needs to happen at one point, not only in that particular instance that you're referring to, but in a broader sense, I think is also states stepping forward in order to sort of make it clear what is okay and what is not okay, once again in support of sort of these norms of responsible state behavior. I'm in a happy position because NATO doesn't regulate the market, so I don't have to deal with the regulation piece. But I think there's sort of a big role here is for national governments, I suspect.
Thank you. Who else would like to weigh in on either?
Unfortunately, I'm not in this happy position as a domestic service. It's quite challenging to deal with social media. On the one side, freedom of speech is essential. I think this is part of the success story of our free society. On the other side, we have some regulations concerning hate speech, and I think this is very important to execute these rules in national context. That's exactly what we do with hate speech, and every time it has to be combined with marketplace regulations, so it makes no sense to deal with hate speech if a social media company is elsewhere, not in Germany. But if they act in Germany, they have to follow the rules in Germany. So this is one aspect which is essential. And yes, social media, this is part of the story. So if I look to our counterparts, they use all instruments, including social media, for their campaigns. And that means that we also have to deal with social media, but in this very challenging balance between freedom of speech on the one side, which is essential for our society, and regulations concerning hate speech and other malware in the communication.
I'll just add one thing to it, maybe a 1-2 punch for both questions, is that in terms of AI, and my colleague already mentioned it, it's very helpful for defenses and kind of flagging and mitigating against sort of that low-hanging fruit of phishing messages or patterns of malicious behavior on the cyber front that enable future network penetrations and additional malicious activities. So it is helpful there, and to the degree that we can harness that and apply those things more broadly and faster in defenses, it's great. AI can also be very helpful in monitoring social media messages. I mean, if we want to talk about disinformation and things like that, push through those channels, AI can be an effective tool to screen some of what's coming out of there. Again, with the establishment of patterns, it'll only get so much, but it can help. So, can be good.
Yeah, it's on.
Sorry. I have a couple of thoughts about first question about conventional use conventional weapons and cyber weapons and during planned of maybe conventional operation. Today we collect information about new military tactics. Use cyberspace and conventional and physical space during the military operation, during the war. Very interesting fact, but we can see, sometimes we can see that, for example, cyber attacks relies before of, for example, missile attacks. And another time we see that cyber attacks relies after conventional attack. Today we collect and analyze this information, and maybe in future and very interesting for research. Can military use cyberspace, sea, air, and battle space and during the war? Very interesting fact, because only today we can see complex use cyber attacks and missile attacks and battle special operation during a more complex operation on different geographical land and on Ukraine, for example. For example, we don't know. We have connection between cyber attacks on Leaf region and in these times special battlefield operation on Donbas region, for example. This is one plan, or independent plan, different military troops of Russian Federation. These troops work common plan of general staff on Russian Federation, or independence, or for example, they work independent each another. This is very interesting question today, and we collect information and invite academia in different countries work together. But in my opinion, today we must do next. Cyberspace, you say cyberspace no border. This is common cyberspace, the first, and this is artificial space, not space from God. And today maybe we must build a collective defense on cyberspace, like NATO, of different another space. Maybe today we have time for build cyber NATO, for example, or cyber NATO, or cyber organization for a good country, maybe for defense, cyber defense of our common cyberspace. And in maybe future we have different cyberspace, light cyberspace and dark cyberspace. I am professor, and I have this is my mind. So this is a very interesting fact today we can see during this war, and this fact need to research in future, today and future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, two more here in the middle, please.
It's on. I have two questions. The first one, of course, was partly answered by Microsoft. And then I'll just say thank you for what you're doing to put different stakeholders together and come up with the best way of fighting these cyber attacks. But then the problem we have is that there are some countries that are like smaller economies and some have got big economies. Now, in the way they use their finances in order to build the capacity to protect themselves, it will be different. And the attackers mostly, they focus on those ones because they know that they are weak links. Is there any deliberate move to make sure that this cyberspace protection and everything is happening at the same level, whether the countries are smaller economies and bigger economies? Because if the bigger economies work on their own, then they'll protect their economies, but they can still be attacked using the smaller economies, and at the end of the day, we all suffer. So that was the first question. And the second one is there any deliberate move to come up with laws that are international in the cyberspace rather than local laws? For example, in my country, I work for the Embassy of Malawi, but in my country, the attackers, the hackers, mostly are those who are already in prison. So probably they are serving 20 years. And they know that if they are caught on hacking, the laws of Malawi maybe could be only 5 years. And they say, if I'm already in prison, so why not? Then I'll just be doing it. So I thought probably the service providers should be able to help in such circumstances to detect that and prevent people from losing money, because in those economies, mostly the hackers, they just come and steal money, let's say, from my account. It has already happened to me before.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there. Thank you very much. I'll let the panel think about that for a moment while we get a second question here in that.
Thank you so much, Bert Deumann, Austrian Cyber Ambassador. Thanks so much for the excellent presentation. Also the statistics of all the cyber attacks that Ukraine suffered in the beginning and throughout the conflict. How effective were these Russian cyber attacks? What was the impact? Could you say something about that? And what was the importance of that you moved many of your services to a cloud infrastructure before the invasion started or thereafter? Is this sort of an effective form of cyber defense? And related to this, sort of, what do you see as the role of tech companies in sort of cyber defense in the future, also based on the lessons learned from Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get quick answers there, if we could, because we're getting close to the end of our time. Mr. Poti, let me ask you to speak to the last question first, if you would, and briefly, if you could.
Thank you. About impact. For example, two most big attack of last year. The first cyber attack of telecommunication system Viasat in Ukraine, 23rd February. This attack have impact and destroy telecommunication service different customs, and impact of telecommunication service and communication between organization and stakeholders, but and different stakeholders, but not military communication. The second attack on government resource and registers on the first period of war. Basic impact. We have two: economical impact. Some small part of register will be destroyed, deleted, and we have after this we spend money for recovery of these registers. And another impact of social impact, because today Ukraine have very high digitalization of public service. You know, we have different register, and citizens use this register for get public service from different agencies, but when this register not work, many people cannot use a very comfortable service from government agencies. For example, citizens don't have access to driver's license, for example, on electronic view, or don't have access for information about private house and so on and so on. But we very quickly recover this register and start special service, digital service for citizens. This is main impact. But today, only each cyber attack needs special research which impact we have, because we a lot of not material impact, but image and non-material impact. For example, in social, political sphere, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leaflander, did you want to speak about the first question, possibly?
Yes, I'll do like 1, 2, 3 in a telegram style.
Please.
So when it comes to the international law, I don't really think that we need a new law. Existing body of international law is quite enough. I think what is needed is state behavior. I go back to my previous point. That's first. Second, when it comes to sort of those territories and those nations that are being used as proxies in order to launch malicious cyber activity, I think there's a lot that is being done by various nations, by NATO allies as well, when it comes to capacity building. I think more can be done in this regard. Some of it is technology, but I can tell you, I mean, my main problem quite often when I do capacity building sort of project, it's not technology. It's actually sort of how do you set yourself up? What are the kind of laws that you have in place, etc., etc. And last but not least, when it comes to the tech companies, for all I care, it starts in the left of the bank. It starts with, you know, the preparation phase and then sort of building all the way to the response phase. I think the artificial dividing lines are exactly that. They're artificial.
Thank you very much. Unless there's another response, I would go to the last question up here, please.
Hi, I'm Maylin Fong, HPI Fellow and Chair of the People-Centered Internet. I just wanted to ask if we are considering how to invest in our collective intelligence. This has come up several times, but we have not actually worked out how to take action together. And collective intelligence was proposed at the very beginning of the internet, but it hasn't been followed up now. And we need to do this because we're facing the light cyberspace and the dark cyberspace. And for those of us who understand OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, act, we are in for some major, major threats in the years ahead if we don't organize ourselves.
Thank you very much. I think actually we can simply let that stand as a closing word on this panel, where there was a great deal of emphasis on the need for collaboration at all levels and between all stakeholders and of course across borders. So let us give our panel a very warm round of applause, please. I think you've shared some very, very valuable insights, and we will pick up on those after a 15-minute break. We will return to this room for our look at resilient cybersecurity architecture. See you shortly.